Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to all the participants. So today I would like to present my research topic. The title is Carbon Emission and GDP Nexus, Empirical Evidence in Malaysia. Basically, the relationship between the economy and the quality of the environment is very close. Previous research studies have found that there is indeed a link between carbon dioxide emissions and economic growth. However, a single study of a country can provide enlightenment and detail on the reaction or relationships that occur between carbon dioxide and economic development. It will also give an overview of the relations of a country. The deterioration of the environment as well as income relations has received high coverage and attention and emerged as one of the exciting topics and has attracted several economists and policymakers so that the policies issues should be accurate. Lately, the effects of the urbanization on carbon emissions have been the focus of many researchers. However, the results are somewhat unconvincing. So the objectives of the study, the study has the objective of studying the relationship between carbon dioxide emissions and economic growth. So it is vital in our efforts to understand whether there is a massive impact on economic growth. This is a few literature review done before this. So basically by the first author Gotch, 2010, the result obtained is the absence of the long-term equilibrium relationship. Absent is a long-term equilibrium relationship and the long-term causal link between carbon emission and economic development. However, there is a short-term two-way relationship between the two. Jonke 2011 attempts to test the relationship for 36 high-income countries for the period 1980 until 2005. So the method recommended by Narayan 2010, see the directions from GDP to carbon emissions are not found in short and also long term. By Achempong 2018, they use a vector panel integration, PIVA, together with the system GMM or system generalized method of moment system to study the dynamic cause and effect relationship between economic growth, carbon emission, and energy consumption for 116 countries. So the result of the study have had impact of implication to the policy of a nation. So the study findings for the study have found that the economic growth does not result in energy consumption globally and regionally. By Lau, 2014, they investigate the existence of a long-run relationship among carbon dioxide and emissions, institutional quality, exports, and economic growth, and further examines the causal relationship among this variable in Malaysia for the period 1984 to 2008. By Alessandro and Anastasio, 2017, looks at the validity of the environmental Kuznets curve theory hypothesis for North American countries. They applied for a long-run testing relationship between the variables using the panel fully modified ordinary least square and the panel dynamic ordinary least square, determined the elasticity of the long-run relationship. The results show that there is a inverted U-shaped relationship. Finally, in the long run, the result of the causality test show that there is a unidirectional causal flow from energy consumption, electricity consumption, and economic growth. So the methodology used for the study, we study using annual data from the World Bank from 1975 to 2016. So the data include is actually only GDP or gross domestic product per capita at constant price, as well as carbon dioxide emissions at constant price or per capita. So all data is already transformed into log or logarithmic form for the analysis. So the testing use configuration, Granger causality test, and also OLS. But before that, we have to check the unit root test, which is very crucial or important because we want to deal with the problem of stationary or non-stationary problem. The unit root tests in this study are conducted by using ADF test and also KPSS test. For the co-integration, integration tests, in this case, when there is no or when there is co-integration in our study, so we can actually identify that there will be a long-run relationship between all the variables. So co-integration exists if this is the equation, better known as disequilibrium error, and then we use angle Granger. Two-step procedure can be applied to test for co-integration. If y and x are not co-integrate, the estimate level regression is indeed invalid. So if x and y are not co-integrate, the estimate level regression is indeed invalid. The relationship between two variables must then estimate at first difference. So in case that when there is no co-integration, we can check with var or vector autoregressive. This is the equation for var. So when we talk about var, the co-integration rank shows the number of co-integrating vectors. For instance, a rank of 2 indicates that two linearly independent combinations of the non-stationary variable will be stationary. Proceed with Granger causality test. Granger causality test is a statistical hypothesis of causal influence based on prediction via vector integration. According to the Granger causality, if x1 Granger cos x2, then past values of x1 should contain information that helps predict x2 above and beyond the information contained in past value of x2 alone. In other words, a time series x1 is said to Granger cos y if it can be shown, usually through a series of t-tests and f-tests. This is a statistical procedure. And then those x1 values provide statistically significant information about future values of x2. This is the Granger causality test when GDP as a dependent variable and carbon dioxide emission as a dependent variable. And then another equation, we put carbon dioxide emission as a dependent variable and GDP as independent variable. The empirical result. So before we go for co-integration, we look at the unit root test to test the data or checking the data to make it simple. When we talk about unit root, we look whether the data is stationary or non-stationary. When we talk about stationary, its data is okay. So when there is a non-stationary issue, this make or miss will lead to problem of regression estimation, probably invalid. But basically here, when you look at the testing result here, we test at level and then the first difference. When we use first level using augmented Dickey-Fuller test that I mentioned before this, when we use or when we run or the result for level, it is non-stationary. But when we difference, when we use the first difference, or we choose first difference, it becomes stationary. Okay, as well as carbon dioxide. It's also stated that when it is a first different, when you test a unit root, it becomes stationary. Using KPSS, also we just or we only want to double check, reconfirm these two very popular testing. When you test about unit root test, one is augmented Dickey-Fuller and one is KPSS. So we compare. It's same result here when we use first difference, so it becomes stationary. Okay, the result of the unit root test based on ADF and KPSS are shown in table 1. Based on the ADF and KPSS tests, both of the variables, GDP and also carbon, are stationary at first different. So we check for angle grandeur, as I mentioned. So the result, we can see that there is no co-integration for angle grandeur test. So the result here shows the result of the co-integration test based on the angle grandeur approach. Based on the outcome, there is no co-integration for the series. The second co-integration test using the Johansen, we see after this, the table 3, shows similar result with the angle grandeur because they show no long-run co-integration relationship between GDP and carbon. So both statistic tests, which are trace eigen and maximum eigen statistic, have produced a similar result. We can see here using Johansen, this is the statistical procedure for Johansen co-integration test. We can see that the value for maximum eigenvalue 2.831 is lower than 14.265. When we use trace statistic, the value also lower than critical value. So it shows that there is no co-integration. So the absence of a long-run co-integration relationship make us to further discuss or further proceed to the another method using OLS. Because there is no VAR, I mean when there is Johansen co-integration test and angle grandeur shows there is no long-run relationship, meaning that we cannot use that. So we have to use OLS, ordinary least square test, to find causality or significant relationship between these two variables, between GDP and carbon. So the result for OLS, okay, result for OLS, we can see here when we put the GDP as an independent and carbon as a dependent variable, we can see that GDP has a significant relationship with carbon dioxide emission. And then we can check here when carbon dioxide emission as a independent variable and economic growth or GDP as a dependent variable, you can see also they show that it is a significant. So carbon dioxide will cause economic growth as well, or they have significant relationship. So based on the result from the least square result by differencing the variable, we actually can identify that there is two-way relationship between GDP and carbon. And GDP will cause carbon, and carbon will cause GDP during the short run period. Checking the model here, we can see that the model is stable because the line here, the blue line here, is within the critical bound value. So it shows that the model is stable, okay, because it is within the critical bound value. This is what we call QSIM test result. For conclusion, the study investigates the relationship between CO2, carbon dioxide emission, and GDP by using aggregate data for Malaysia. Based on this study, there is a significant relationship between economic growth and carbon dioxide emission, and it supports evidence from Saburi 2012, which applying the concept of environmental Kuznets curve hypothesis. In particular, Noroyanto also and Rifai 2017 produced the same result, showing there is economic growth, which has a significant effect on carbon dioxide emission. So based on the result, the government should imply, we can say, or we can suggest here, the government should imply a policy to have a restriction maybe on the industry that exceeds a certain level of emission. For future research, okay, it's quite crucial if we could add other explanatory variable like international trade and use a more sophisticated technique which could contribute to increasing in environmental degradation. To decrease the CO2 emission in the urban area, the government could limit the release of CO2 emission in that particular state. So every business industry should help also in reducing the CO2 emission, and solar energy can be recycled and easy to be obtained by everyone, especially the business sector. This conclusion that we can make. This is a few reference I put here. Reference for my research. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.